The Birds of the Air by L. H. Arthur, independently published, 2022. Libby Barnett saw what happened, but the adults in her small town don't believe her. On a spring day in 1933, a strange man appeared in Libby's backyard. Like a figure from a dark fairy tale, he worked a staggering transformation on Libby's younger sister, and the little girl was lost. Blaming herself, 13-year-old Libby becomes unshakable in her determination to find her sister. When a young drifter offers help, she sets out with him into the dangerous, vagrant underground of the Great Depression. But soon she finds she has entered an underworld even more secretive and terrifying, where practitioners of a costly, barbaric magic use stolen children to harness power. It is from the most lethal of these men that Libby must recover her sister. She is willing to give everything. It won't be enough. It's been a long time since I've read a coming-of-age story, and I had forgotten how satisfying those can be. Of course, we do have dark fantasy elements that I enjoy here, but we'll get to that a little later. The Birds of the Air follows 13-year-old Libby on a self-appointed quest to rescue her little sister from a magic-wielding group of hobos in the 1930s. The book slams right into it in the first chapter. Libby and her sister Maisie live with their mother in the Depression-era Midwest. While doing chores, Libby catches her 8-year-old sister Maisie talking with a passing-by hobo at the edge of their property, wearing a birdcage on his back. Libby runs to get her sister and realizes Maisie has received a piece of candy from the man. Libby tries to get it from her defiant little sister, and that goes about as well as anyone with a younger sibling can imagine. Maisie takes off from Libby, quickly eating the piece of candy in the process, which turns her into a small sparrow. The hobo scoops up the small bird and places it in his cage to leave. Libby gives chase and is able to grab the cage and break it. This frees the bird and it flies away. The hobo begins to confront Libby, but then a strange pain in his neck commands his full attention and he just simply leaves. Libby is frantic to get her sister back and begins trying to capture every bird that makes its way onto their property, but to no avail. That night, a teenage boy called Scab shows up outside, telling Libby he was sent to her by a man that knows where Maisie is. At first, Libby is not buying it, but the knowledge the boy has of her name, her sister's name, and the events that happened just keeps nagging at the back of her mind. That, coupled with the grief of her mother, and the distance that grief puts on the relationship between Libby and her mom, pushes Libby to find the boy in order to rescue Maisie. The story that follows is a crazy string of events as Libby and Scab go all over the Midwest, jumping between trains, lonely roadways, and homeless encampments while a dark, magical underworld is slowly revealed. In a strange way, this book felt like it took forever to read, but in a good way. By the time I got to the end, the characters were nothing like when I started. There is a massive character growth throughout this book, especially with Libby. We follow Libby from being a naive child who is guarded from a lot of the adult situations by the other characters, to someone that is now questioning life and death, personal responsibility, and coming to terms with the things that she cannot change. Genre-based, this story is all over the place, in a great way. At times, the book had a Wizard of Oz type feeling. There are several segments that were reminiscent of the Saw franchise, and I even got a heavy biblical good versus evil feeling toward the end. Trying to nail this down to a single genre is very hard to do. Above all else, it is an urban fantasy, but there are some heavy horror elements and dark fiction to keep those fans engaged as well. Dark magic and the sacrifices for that magic is what kept me intrigued above all else. The magic system here is never fully explained as far as origins, but the writer does well with establishing rules of the magic system early on and not having any characters deviate from those rules. If I were to split the book into 3 parts, we go from a traveling coming-of-age story where Libby experiences the poorer side of life, to a more dark fantasy feel, culminating to an almost psychological horror thriller feel at the end of it. The author has a great style of subtly tiptoeing around darker, more adult subjects for Libby's sake, but by the end she's on her own and is forced into the dark realities of things, and the subtleties are just thrown out the window at that point. This book has something for everyone. The magic system for fantasy fans, the constant reminder of the time frame and dialogue for historical fiction fans, and the third act of the book is sure to satisfy horror and dark fantasy fans. I know I've brought up the idea of some darker elements, and I can't really get into it much without spoiling the end, but trust me, they're there. There's enough hints at a darker magic system going on to keep you enthralled and guessing throughout the whole book. You spend your time in the book following a 13-year-old character, and by the time you get to the third act, things get really dark, and I will admit I was not ready for it. Let's just say you'll get into some torture, some human experimentation. There was just nothing to prepare me for what we got into. We get quite the cast of characters with this story. Libby is a polite, naive 13-year-old girl. Some of the things she didn't know struck me as odd starting out, but the writer has subtle ways of reminding the reader that the book takes place in the 1930s, so I was always able to keep that into consideration. Libby hasn't been corrupted by social media yet, I guess. Eventually, though, Libby is forced into a wider knowledge of things by the events in the story, and watching her emotional growth was amazing. Scab was a great character. Even though he's a teenager, life on the road and his various hardships that get revealed throughout the story makes for a hard, gritty, no-nonsense mindset. His main objective is to get the job done and simply survive. He hasn't got time for friends or enjoying things, and Libby is set on breaking that mindset, even if it is unintentional on her part. Roach is an ever-cheerful grandfather-type character, at least in feel. I don't think it ever points out his age, but that was the feel I got from him. Roach's role is mainly cook and camp caretaker, but his main objective turns into keeping Libby filled in on events and to lighten the mood whenever things get too dark. Pullman is a strange, eccentric figure that Scab and Roach work for. Pullman is a magic-wielding vagrant leader of one of the various factions we come across in the story, but there always seems to be something that sets him apart from the other hobos. Other than his magic, of course. With continuous instructions from his boss, a man named Jaeger, Pullman and his crew's goal is to keep Libby safe while trying to retrieve the wandering sister in bird form before their rival John Fuller can. I know of some high fantasy fans that will have nothing to do with urban fantasy, but I suggest they give this one a try. Replacing the hobos with rogues or dwarves, and the ringleaders with wizards or elves, this book is easily high fantasy. There was very little I could find on the author, and from the best I can tell, this is their debut novel. Very, very well done for a debut novel. I would love to be able to find out more about L.H. Arthur, to see what makes their mind tick the way it does, and I would love to see something in the future to let us know how Libby's life proceeds with the knowledge of things that she has now. Thank you to everyone that takes the time out of their day to listen to these reviews. I hope I've been able to make some good recommendations, and that some of you follow up with some of these books. Until next time, find yourself a good book and enjoy a break from reality.